It's my perspective as an artist and a creative that is most beneficial to organizations seeking and how to change.
I'm Doreen Lorenzo.
And I'm Michael Baker.
Welcome to Creativity is the Job of the Future, where we talk to people who are harnessing the power of creativity to overcome major challenges.
How do you channel that and encourage that creativity while being able to shape it?
I personally think at the end of the day, we all need to play more.
Our presence is the gift that allows for revelation.
The more hard things feel for us as a society, the more we actually need to lean into play to really learn how to be with each other.
There's this false sense of like happy, shiny brightness when it comes to joy. And I want to come back to I think of joy as a depth. And I think that's the exciting part.
So Doreen and I have been launching and running the School of Design and Creative Technologies at UT in Austin for about 8 years now. And something that we have come to recognize is that the programs that we run are focused around design practice, and in my case, creative technologies. But we recognize that creativity has value beyond that. There's more to it than just art making and design and typical creative outputs. Creativity can live in many places and is a real force for good. And so we've started describing the program over the years under this idea of creativity is the job of the future. There's something here which is really important for all of us, which is not just about art making. And that's why we decided, we should really be talking to people about this and chatting with folks who are moving through the world in a different way, moving through the world creatively, and really expanding that idea of what creativity is and what it can be. So
I met Luna Malbroux at a creativity conference at the beginning of 2022, at a time when our country was collectively coming to terms with its history of systemic racism, and a lot of companies and organizations were trying to figure out how to change their culture. And Luna, with Joy Channel, was helping some of them through that process from the perspective of openness, presence, play, and joy. So I was so excited when she agreed to talk with us for the podcast and bring along her amazing colleague, AJ Haynes.
My name is Luna Malbroux, and I'm the founder and current captain of the 7 C's of Joy Channel. 7 C's being care, community, creativity, comedy, some other C's in there. We are a collective of multidisciplinary artists and public servants and leaders and coaches who really help communities, organizations, institutions shift and change, whether that's specifically changing their culture or trying to communicate to a diverse population. We love working with people. I am a woman that was born in Louisiana, a very rural small town in Louisiana called Opelousas, Louisiana. Whoop, whoop. We are the Zydeco capital of the world, birthplace of Zydeco. And growing up, I had so much creativity, and there weren't a lot of opportunities at all as far as places for me to put it. And growing up in a rural town where my classmates were married in junior high. I had a married classmate, had classmates that were pregnant in junior high. I was experiencing systems that were targeting the mostly Black population of Louisiana. I was experiencing it before I even had words for it. And I became really close with a Teach for America teacher who started an actor program at my school. And I joined that program. And then she went back to Portland, Oregon, and actually created an exchange program. And so my senior year, I went to this artsy school in Portland, and that school was under attack. There was a time when they were going to be removing funding for that school. And at the time, I just applied to college. I was applying to political science programs and theater programs and all those things. But I remember going to the local meeting and speaking up at that meeting and saying, hey, arts are really important. The creativity here is really important. And if you take away funding for this school, your school systems will look like mine in Louisiana. And that was enough to convince these people to not strip away that funding. And the school literally had a ceremony thanking me a few days later. And I share the story because I feel like the story of my life is me really just trying to be a creative person, really just trying to do creative things. But because I'm a Black queer woman, often in rural places, I ended up getting pulled into social justice by the sake of just me living my life. I got pulled into reproductive justice by the sake of me not wanting to have my friends and peers being pregnant without any resources. So through that, there's been a long career of me merging art and creativity and creating ways for us to think about how our systems change along the way. And I've done that in a variety of mediums, from being an actor to doing stand-up comedy to diving headfirst into music. And that's where I met wonderful, amazing beings like AJ Haynes, who I'm joined with, who is many things, but also currently my producer as a solo artist. Whoop, whoop. So I'd love to introduce and bring my producer and fellow colleague and creative doula, AJ Haynes, into this conversation.
Oh my God, what a beautiful intro. I also, when you're speaking about your journey, I know that it's so much more expansive. Like, how do you encapsulate so much of what you've done? And I love that you began from the Deep South. I love that you began from your rural upbringing. I was born in Japan, but spent my childhood in Columbia, Louisiana. So I too am from the deep, dirty, the Deep South, Louisiana in the house. Sorry, I just kind of jumped in. AJ Haynes here, she, they, they, Earthling here on this planet, traveled this world as an international touring artist, lead singer of a genre expansive band called Seratones. Also have been in these reproductive justice streets. I was a patient advocate at one of the last abortion clinics in Louisiana for over a decade, board chair of the first Black-led abortion fund here in Louisiana. And yeah, just multi-dimensional being, just trying to stay free out here, succeeding actually. And my official title is Creative Doula for Joy Channel. Lou and I connected through the Louisiana Abortion Fund. We were in a creative process as an organization, which takes some destruction, which takes some rethinking, which takes some unlearning and relearning old ways of being and growing together. And so we first, we're in these RJ streets and these creative streets as well. So I think our first conversation was like, I was a new board chair, the first Black board chair of this abortion fund. And I said, look here, I don't know how to run an abortion fund, but I worked in abortion care for 10 years as a patient advocate while being a touring artist. We're going to figure it out. And that we have. And so you too have been my creative doula in so many ways. So it's a equally, equitably beautiful dynamic that we have.
I love that. And the beauty about this story and how we met is that Joy Channel is a collective of creatives that really apply a multidisciplinary approach to change. And our strategy is focusing on shifting culture. And we do that in a variety of ways, whether that's how we help organizations rethink communications, which is some of the work that we were doing with Louisiana Abortion Fund. But we also think through, what's the culture? Like, how does an organization shift their culture? And so AJ and I met in that space.
We were in reproductive justice work before we had the language and framework to articulate our experiences. You were saying that creativity is the work of the future, and I also believe it's the work of the past and reclamation and rediscovery. So I'm in that process as a creative, looking backwards as I'm looking forwards. I'm in the true tradition of Afrofuturism, which is nonlinear, which is embracing the genius of this earth, of this planet. And so going in all directions at once and dealing with polycrises and how you have to be creative because what was working by design to oppress you is currently falling apart. And so what was happening before oppression? What is the remembrance of that? And what were people doing before we even had language to describe this? So I love that what Joy Channel focuses on are some things that can't quite be verbalized. They have to be experienced. It is experiential learning and not putting overemphasis on getting the language just right and focusing on, am I doing this the right or wrong way? Creativity is not a binary. What excites me about Joy Channel is that it embraces that and is adaptive in that way. So focusing on culture is key.
Creativity is also not a linear or a solo project. I think it takes many different people of a variety of skill sets, visions, experience to come in and really support organizations with change. It's not just like my approach. My bio that I shared was so funny because you're like, who are you? Well, I was born in Louisiana. That's pretty much all I said. But I also have a master's in clinical social work and international social welfare from Columbia. But I actually think it's my perspective as an artist and a creative that is most beneficial to organizations seeking and how to change. And they expect me to come in with this like, ooh, this is master's level social work stuff and this is lingo. But I come in as like, as a comedian, these are the ways that you might be able to find joy. Or as a musician, these are the ways that you take people with a bunch of different skill sets who or might be skilled at playing different instruments, so to speak, and you bring that all together to create one sound. It's those experiences that actually lend themselves to shifting organizations far better than the experiences I gained in the traditional education system that teaches one right way.
I want to roll back. You named your company Joy Channel. That's not typically like Joy Channel LLC, like that's not typical of what you see. So talk about that decision. And also, you talk a lot about the storytelling aspect of it, right? You're telling us, why is that so important?
Awesome. I love those questions. So a Joy Channel team member of ours, Molly McHenry, Molly is actually a nurse practitioner, and she trains organizations in understanding how to better serve a variety of diverse populations. So she has like this deep medical history insight on like trauma-informed care. She also is the funniest person I know. And I'm a stand-up comedian. I've been a stand-up comedian for 10 years. And one day I heard her say, that baby's on the Joy Channel. She just has these little phrases that she just says. And I was like, oh, Joy Channel, that's it. And I think that there's something about one, in working around helping people understand, like, how do we access belonging? How do we shift culture? How do we create equity? I, as a comedian and a creative, understand that you have to speak to people in a language they understand. So whereas a lot of folks come in with like academic jargon, even the language of DEI for a lot of people, as we know right now, is so stigmatized. So Joy Channel is purposely subversive and purposely inviting into saying, this is the world we are trying to build. We are trying to build a world where everyone is able to access their humanity. And that doesn't mean that we're always going to be joyous as in happy, but when we're able to connect to our full humanity, whether that's being able to grieve when you need to grieve, or allowing anger to come up, or be in a space where it's okay to be afraid, or it's okay to be different, or it's okay to be confused, that is true joy and the fullness of being oneself and the fullness of safety and belonging. And so we really wanted to name the collective something that shows what we are aspiring to create and invite people into.
So I want to follow through on the storytelling. You're bringing us into your life by telling stories, which is a skill. It's an absolute skill. And it also, you're taking down a lot of barriers by doing that. Tell us about that. Tell us how you use that. That's an art, a skill, and a gift.
So I'm going to say a little bit, and then I'm going to invite AJ because this queen right here is brilliant at it. But I'll start off by saying, I think that's the Southern influence. I'm from rural Louisiana, and to me, that means I'm from a place that has had so many things thrown at it again and again. And when we talk about lack of an education system, lack of access to healthcare, literally growing up in Cancer Alley, there's so many things that have been thrown at where I come from and the community of people that I am, but I have never seen such joy, such resilience, and that is rooted in storytelling. And so going back to what AJ said about creativity is the future, it's also the past. I come from a lineage of storytellers who were fortunately or fortunately, if you're trying to get something done, even if you're going to the post office, it's like, well, let me tell you what I did today. And then you get involved in a little story. But I think the brilliance of storytelling, too, is that that's how our human brains, we love to cling on to a story in order to make meaning of something. And so if we're trying to communicate with folks, one of the questions I have in the back of my head is, what's the story they know? What's a story they might be telling themselves? What's a story that they haven't had access to? And so I think in communicating via stories, we're able to go a lot deeper than quote unquote information. And that's one of our tenets that we say at Joy Channel, is that information does not equal transformation. Because I think often people are just throwing information at people and we're wondering, why, what, the science says this, why aren't you responding to it? Well, because it's not connected to a story. But AJ, I'd love to hear more from you.
Seriously, me just furiously shaking my head and like pursing my lips, like, right. Like stories are an invitation with multiple entry points, which allows for different points of emergence and refraction. You just don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's the exciting part, because whenever someone's coming to you with this plus this equals this outcome, where's the fun in that? Where's the possibility of that? And what I love about Joy Channel is that there are opportunities for disruption. There are opportunity. I also have a Master of Arts in Teaching and taught for a good chunk of time before hitting the road as a touring artist. In my classroom management style, I invited a bit of disruption, actually, because I fundamentally disagreed with how the school is structured and how, you have these creative beings, these children that are just like, I have this idea. And how do you channel that and encourage that creativity while being able to shape it in a way that they want, not necessarily what you want as the outcome? Which is why I had to leave the school system, because, here we are. Because you have to meet certain outcomes. And I'm just like, that's not what's going to work. But I digress. I want to touch back on joy, because I feel like there's this false sense of like happy, shiny brightness when it comes to joy. And I want to come back to like, I think of joy as a depth. And I also think of joy as like, the closer I can touch my joy is the closer I can touch my rage too. Not thinking of it as something that's not connected to rage.
I wanted to ask about organizations that are interested in change, but might not be oriented in the ways that you're describing, or open to these ideas of like, oh, of course, joy is this thing. And we understand it in this way. Like, what has that experience been like, or that process been with different organizations, and especially different people in these organizations? Often they're oriented and positioned in different ways. What if you could just expand a little bit on that?
I'd love to talk about that, because I think there's a lot of beauty in a collective that says, look, we're going to have a creative, multidisciplinary approach to shifting culture by design. And there's a lot of folks who are like, yes, that sounds good, but what does that mean exactly? And what does that mean for us? And where my social worker hat comes in is meeting people where they are at. I understand that maybe jumping in with like the depths of joy, for many people, they don't even know what an emotion is. And I'm not even being facetious. I mean, like, seriously, people are walking around not even knowing what they're feeling, because as a culture, we're used to numbing things out. So I think that's where it's really important for us to really just like first have a conversation, how we tend to work first. And we get really curious around like, what's going well, what's not working, what are some things that you'd like to change? And then we kind of, in that conversation, kind of explore a little bit about the sandbox that we're able to play in based on people's budget and what they're thinking of doing. It's like, maybe we could start with maybe it's a training, maybe it's not a training, maybe it's a party actually, or maybe it's a podcast that we support an organization to develop, or maybe there's some way that we can play together. So It's a bit of a conversation and it's a bit of a dance, very experiential, it's very hands-on. And I personally think at the end of the day, we all need to play more. That's kind of where I'm at 4 years in. It's just like, actually, the more we go down this road and this path of creativity, the more I'm leaning deeper, deeper into play. Both my social worker brain and my creative brain are aligned on this, because when we think about people who are experiencing trauma and crises, often you can't access language. And when you think about people who may not feel safe enough to be in a space where you're able to communicate really hard concepts back and forth. You think about little kids maybe who've experienced a lot of trauma. The therapist doesn't go and say, well, talk to me about where you experience inequity. What do? They play. And so I think actually the more that we've been doing this work, the more that we've leaned into play as the entry point. And through play, people are able to say, wow, I just had fun with a coworker, or I just had a new idea that I didn't have because there's something about the joy of this play that shifted things for me and I feel revived. The more hard things feel for us as a society, the more we actually need to lean into play to really learn how to be with each other.
Play is associated with little kids doing something. Play is not associated with actually having really amazing outcomes, because you're using your mind and you're using your thoughts. You're just doing things differently. And that's all we're asking people to think, is not always looking at the world in the same linear path that you've always looked at it. Because if you do that, you kind of end up nowhere. That's not how, innovation and new discoveries and all this other stuff happens, right? You have to try to think about, how do you get people to look at the world differently? Now, that's really scary. Oh my God, that's really, who moved my cheese? Do not let me look at the world differently at all, because I'm so afraid what could happen to me. So how do you help people get there? How do you have them have those moments of joy where they go, oh, okay, this is not so scary. Like, this is a good thing. And I want to keep doing this, because the reinforcement when you keep doing this is much better than being on that linear path.
I'd like to chime in and say, what I'm not hearing is embodiment. I'm hearing and I think that's something that we exercise and play with really intuitively at Joy Channel, because whenever we pivot towards play, there is an opportunity for embodiment and creates this dynamic that's an equalizer, because we have to embrace the awkward. And you embrace the awkward and sit with it, the discomfort, long enough, because you're not thinking about it actually. Think a little less, actually. Less thinking and more presence, because our presence is the gift that allows for revelation. I also think that accessing the depth of my joy is accessing the depth of my rage, which is also accessing the depth of my grief. So I laugh because I cry a lot too. It has to get out of my body. It has to be experienced, to be metabolized, so that we can get to a solution. Luna is also an incredible samba dancer. And a lot of people are wanting to do some next level exercising, but you ain't stretched yet. I've loved learning from Luna's ability to tap into where people are. And how do we stretch first? How do we consent? What does consent look like? And how do we exercise that together?
In our world today, what we saw 4 years ago has changed now. People are treating what you do very differently. So how creatively are you telling the story now? Because we can't lose this. People can't stop doing it. But let's face it, there's been fear that's been put in people. So, and it pains me to talk about this, but I think there's a whole group of people that would like to see all of this go away. And there's a whole group of people that says, oh, hell no, it's not going anywhere. And just how do we retell this story? So again, creatively keeping yourself as relevant, as important as it is. What have you been doing?
So we're in the midst of shifting a lot of things. Our website has shifted. The language we're using has shifted. And the reason why we're shifting is to A, keep people safe, because our work at the heart of it is being targeted because people know it works. I also think when I founded Joy Channel 4 years ago, I was trying to shift the culture and the whole industry of a lot of folks who do similar work that might just call themselves like a DEI practitioner. And I was trying to shift that industry to be more playful, to be more experiential, to use storytelling, because I think of a lot of language floating around, like I think of the word love. And you called me out, I'm a storyteller, so often I use this example to help people access things. And I date sometimes, so this still comes up, where you tell somebody, I like you, and it's just like, well, what does that mean? Well, I like you, but do I love you? Or that word means a different thing to everybody. And I think diversity is a word that might mean a different thing to everyone. And so our goal right now, our work right now, as we communicate, as we think about all the things coming at us, is to continue to paint and invite people in into co-creating a world that they want to live in. It's not about talking about what we don't want. It's talking about what we do want and where you get to belong. Like, I think the goal now is helping people not only name that, but get into the process of co-creating that together. And that's real fun. That could be real fun despite everything, to say like, all right, what if we knock everything off this table and try again? What would that look like? What would you want in there? And to really ask people, what does a safe, sustainable world look like for them? And to get really curious about that conversation with people. And so even though our language has shifted, we're diving deeper into the core of what we came to do, which is create access for people to really shift culture in whatever way they can.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in and say what I've always cherished about this process with Joy Channel is that, from what you've articulated, Luna, you were very intentional in not wanting to put a stake in, this is the jargon we're going to use, and instead shifting to what are adaptable practices that we can use in real time for not only problem solving, but like creating opportunities for fun, right? It's always been a creative process. So although we are in the process of shifting some things around mainly for the sake of safety because we are targeted, it's never not been a creative process. So it feels really fluid, and it looks and feels honestly very seamless, even as we are dealing with a whole lot. It feels like this is where I come back to the wise body. Like, it feels like dance. And this is why, Luna as a founder is such an amazing co-creator, because there's always the creative embodiment praxis happening.
Unfortunately, one of the reasons that we did change our site is the level of targeting that is being experienced by anyone who does equity work. And even though our work is in belonging and using creativity, folks very quickly will be like, I don't know about this. This seems like you're trying to create joy, and we're anti-joy, anti-belonging. And so to protect our people, we do not have any names on the site right now. So I just want to be very clear, since you brought that up. It's a protective measure that unfortunately we need to take at this time. But yeah, we're still.
Can I just let out a scream because of that?
Yes, please.
It's just horrifying, but understood. But I just want to go on record to just say that is absolutely horrifying. Okay, I'm going back to being silent now.
I scream at some point in time every week about that too.
I think it's a healthy scream. And also, I just want to bring back, because Joy Channel's been working with people that are at the forefront of all this. As the South goes, so goes the nation. A lot of our clients have been Southern. We've already been dealing with this. It's not a new thing for me to have to, really think about digital security. This is what me as a Black queer woman, queer femme out here in these reproductive justice streets, is what we've already been doing. So we scream, we laugh, we kiki, and we keep it moving.
AJ Haynes is an interdisciplinary, interdependent, interdimensional Black and Filipino queer singer, songwriter, actress, educator, and reproductive justice activist from the South. She is the leader of the genre-expansive soul power band Seratones, which has garnered national and international acclaim. And she believes art is part of collective community care, and that our bodies are sites for liberation and joy. Luna Malbroux is a comedian, writer, musician, and playwright who also happens to be a national leading equity, inclusion, diversity, and anti-racist educator and consultant. She uses her unfiltered humor to shine a light on politics and identity in America. Together with Joy Channel, they are helping build cultures where everyone can thrive. Creativity is the Job of the Future is produced in Austin, Texas, and hosted by Doreen, Lorenzo, and Michael Baker. You can find out more about our team, connect with us, and listen to all of the shows in our library at cjfpodcast.com. We're also on LinkedIn and Instagram. For Creativity is the Job of the Future, I'm Rebecca McEnroy. Thanks for listening.